My name's Lex Van Dyck, and I'm the supplier coordinator with Fireweed Food Hub, and I'm here with Ari from Natural Collective.
Hi, I'm Arianna. I'm 1/3 of Natural Collective Farm. We're a small farm just outside the city near Niverville. We grow on 3 acres, and we grow for our CSA, market garden, and for retail customers.
Awesome. Thanks very much for joining me. We're going to talk today a little bit about crop planning. So what are some things that you think about when you're developing a vision for the products and the amounts of products that you want to offer for wholesale?
So when I'm crop planning, what we're thinking about on my farm is filling CSA numbers, filling retail numbers, and filling market numbers. And for retail, we're primarily selling to restaurants. So I'm not gonna plan to grow the same amount as I would for our CSA. So like, for example, like if I'm growing Napa cabbage, I would do just like 1 bed of Napa cabbage or like a half bed of Napa cabbage rather than like a bed or 2 that I would do for CSA, because generally our restaurant numbers are going to be lower than our CSA and market numbers.
Okay, fair enough. And in terms of the amount that you're going to be harvesting at one time, are you planning for sort of succession planting with those retail crops?
Totally. Yeah, so ideally, if you're doing things like radishes, Napa, fennel, stuff like that, that you don't want to necessarily like have at the market every week or have at your CSA every single week. Like with radishes, for example, we sell like 15 pounds or so every week to one restaurant. So we want to make sure that we're doing succession plantings of them like every 2 weeks or so that we always have radishes available.
Totally. They're popular.
Yeah, they are.
And then when you think about the varieties that you want to offer, how are you choosing between specialty varieties where the seed might be a bit more expensive or the labor might be more intensive, but the price is higher, versus like those staples that are consistent and reliable?
Yeah, so for some varieties, like if I know that it's going to be popular and it's going to sell to a restaurant, even if the seed price is higher, I'll grow it because I know that it will sell and I won't have to like be pushing the product, because that's a lot of work for us. And if I know that like if I'm selling to a restaurant, I can probably charge a better price for it anyway. And then like otherwise I would look at like how easy it is to grow, like how much more labor it'll take, stuff like that. Yeah.
So as long as that additional labor and cost to grow that specialty product is offset by how much higher the price might be.
And how quickly I can move it.
Okay, yeah. Fair. So not necessarily worth it if it all has to move super quickly or it's gonna go bad on you.
Right, yeah.
Gotcha. So when you're thinking through who your ideal customer is, whether it's a retailer or a restaurant, you mentioned you'd pick a restaurant. How do you choose that?
Totally. So with restaurants, usually it's a little bit less labor, because I'll go back to the radish example. They'll order like 15 pounds, and then I don't have to like do a bunch of bunches like I would have to for like a grocery store or something. So I can just like harvest, wash, pack, done. It's like much easier, a lot less labor for us. Yeah.
That's awesome. And then in terms of like working with a retailer instead of a restaurant, what are some of the expectations that you're seeing from retailers?
Totally. So they want like a very consistent product. Like if you're, again with radishes, making radish bunches, you want to make sure they're all the same weight.
Okay.
And you want to make sure the sizes are kind of consistent and like you're giving a consistent product. But you can move a lot more this way, which is really nice. Yeah.
Fair. Does the size of your farm also factor into that decision, where you're selling enough to restaurant customers that you don't need to touch retail?
At this current moment, yes, but we're hoping to increase production a lot in the coming years, so we'll see.
Fair.
Yeah.
So maybe.
Yeah.
Cool. So now let's talk a little bit about taking customer requests and factoring that into your crop planning. How doable is it for you on your farm to delay some of your crop planning until after that like holiday season rush in December for restaurants?
For like the big things that will grow, like squash and cucumbers and like staples, stuff like that, we'll already kind of like have a plan based on the previous year. But for things like if a restaurant is like, I want fennel like every other week or something, that's pretty easy to throw in. The only things you're gonna have to really worry about are buying your seeds before they sell out and getting them before you need to start seeding them. So those are some things to think about.
Fair.
Yeah.
When do you generally start to see seeds of some of those popular varieties of things start to sell out?
It's changed in the last couple of years because now the demand for seed is way up. So a lot of people are buying seed a lot earlier, like sometimes December. But you can generally still find seed like all throughout the season. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. And then when you're thinking about the product requests that you're receiving from potential customers, how are you deciding whether to accept those requests or not, and deciding if they're right for you and your farm?
So some things, like if I've never grown it before, then I might be a little bit more hesitant unless it's something that feels like very achievable. If it's something like super, super niche that I don't think, like if the customer decided they didn't want to buy it and I was growing it and I would have to try very hard to sell it to someone else, then I might not be interested in growing it. If it's gonna take a lot of labor and a lot of like insect netting, different things like that, then I might be hesitant. But also, generally, it is really, really beneficial to accept what restaurants, chefs might want you to grow, because then you're building that relationship and it'll benefit you in the long term.
That makes really good sense.
Yeah.
In terms of a potential request, say you had a retailer approach you that was interested in a fairly large volume over an extended period of time, how would you vet that kind of a request?
Like I was saying with the previous question, like sometimes you want to be a little bit cautious because these things do fall through. And so if you're growing a large quantity of something and the customer, the retail wholesaler, whatever, decides that they're actually not going to buy your product, you might be in a tricky situation. So you kind of want to like make sure you have like pretty good communication throughout that, and also like make sure that it's a product that you are able to sell elsewhere. Like something like radishes, you will be able to find places to move it and stuff like that. So yeah.
Fair. So having those backup outlets,
Yeah.
especially if it's going to be a large amount where
Exactly.
you don't want to spend a lot of extra marketing time on it.
Yeah, and if it's something that is not going to hold well, like if you can't sell it like the week that it's ready, then just like keeping that in mind too when you're agreeing to grow things like this. Yeah.
Fair. What about when you're asked to grow something that is a new variety for you, or that has a bit of a longer season than you might choose for sort of an optimal product in our climate?
Yeah, it totally depends, really. Like, I would look at success rates with other people. I would see like what other farms are doing, stuff like that. Like, if I do think it's feasible, then I'm probably down to try it. But yeah, again, like it's tricky. You have to like, maybe one season you just trial a little bit of that product, like do like one bed, and then if it works out, the next season you can like go crazy. But then there's gonna have to be a lot of patience from the customer involved in that.
Fair. And then in terms of sort of fitting the potential product requests to the infrastructure that you have on your farm, how do things like cold storage or like off-season storage for root vegetables and that sort of thing factor in?
For sure. So if you're planning on growing like a large volume of garlic and onions and you're wanting to sell it like cured, like bulk in the later season, you have to make sure that you have space to cure and dry your stuff.
Right.
If you don't have space for that, you shouldn't be growing it. Otherwise, you're gonna have to sell it all fresh, and not everyone wants fresh garlic and onions. Same with like beets and squash. If you're growing large volumes of squash, like in September, October, you're probably not going to be able to sell all of that product in those 2 months. So you're going to have cold storage and totes and all that stuff to be able to keep them a little bit longer as you slowly sell through your product.
Fair. That makes really good sense. So return business is super important for farm sales over time. How are you managing, like living up to customer expectations so that return business keeps coming back to you?
Yeah, so it's very important when a customer requests something to reroute, that you are able to fulfill it. So like looking at your crops and like properly identifying like how much of each you'll have to be able to sell, and like making sure that you clean them properly. And yeah, like that's super important. You want to make sure you're like offering the best product that you possibly can so that they know what you have to offer. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're thinking about storing a product or maintaining that quality and also food safety, how are you handling that? How are you handling field heat?
So it depends on the crop, but things like salad mix and lettuces and herbs and flowers and stuff, like if you can, you want to make sure you're harvesting them in the morning. And even still, if you're doing that, you often will want to harvest it and then immediately put it into your cooler, like in the open air, like not in a tote, not in a bag, so that the field heat can release from the product. With some things, you can hydrocool them in cold water. That makes a huge, huge difference too. For like a lettuce head, it'll keep it perky for a lot longer. And if you just like immediately put in a tote, put in the cooler, the field heat is gonna stay in the tote, and it's gonna like wilt the greens and your herbs and your flowers and stuff like that. And like you won't be able to deliver a proper product to your customer that day or the next day. And as time goes on, it'll just get worse and worse and worse. And with things like basil, like you don't want to get that wet, but you're gonna want to get the field heat off. So again, you're gonna just wanna like have it in like a crate or something in your cooler and just let the field heat come off for a little bit and then pack it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair. We've got some meat producers with the food hub as well. So when they're thinking about how they're going to transport a product or how they're going to package it, we're also asking them questions around like, if you're going to offer primal cuts to us, which are really large, do you have an appropriate way to transport that?
Yeah.
Do you have a cooler, or do you have a way to plug in a freezer in your vehicle that you can transport this big cut of meat still frozen or still refrigerated to our food hub as well?
Yeah, and just to add on to that point with veggies and herbs and flowers, another thing you have to consider is if you're going to be doing deliveries for an entire day, make sure that you have your stuff stored properly, and if you can, like in a refrigerated truck or van or whatever, so that it's not sitting in a hot car for the entire day.
Fair. Yeah. Removing field heat doesn't do much if
It doesn't
you add
do
it all
much.
back in.
Exactly, yeah.
Fair. When you're thinking about balancing customer pricing expectations with your own need to make a profit, how are you figuring out your price points?
That one's a little bit tricky. You have to like look at so many different things on your end, like the labor you put into it, the price of seed, the price of like how much time you're spending processing it, the water use, like all of that kind of thing. I think a lot of us could do a lot better job at doing that. It's like a tricky thing to figure out, but it is important, because if you are designating a huge portion of your farm to something that's not making you any kind of return, then you need to reevaluate that.
Yeah, that's fair. When you're thinking through a product request that's got really specific aesthetic considerations behind it, how do you decide whether you're going to take that or not?
So yeah, things to consider are like pest pressures associated with the vegetable or the green or whatever. Like, for example, this year we had a lot of requests for mustard greens, and a lot of them we weren't able to fill because the flea beetles just like tore them to shreds. So you have to think about stuff like that, because yes, I could have sold the mustard greens, but it would reflect poorly on my business because they were eaten up. So yeah, you have to like really take those things into consideration when you're crop planning and accepting these kinds of,
Fair. So if those aesthetics are going to add extra stress or extra labor or extra cost, maybe not worth it.
Yeah, if you have to cover the whole bed and then the row cover doesn't actually do anything, maybe don't do it.
Fair.
Yeah.
Very fair. So can you walk me through how you are doing your crop planning at Natural Collective for wholesale as compared to Farmers Market or CSA for this coming year?
Totally. Well, for CSA, we kind of want to have like, you have 1 week when you have like a cabbage, you have 1 week when you have radishes, kinds of things. But for wholesale, you want to be able to have like a consistent product, because chefs don't want to change their menu every single week to meet what you have. So if a chef is working with fennel, you want to make sure that you have fennel every single week. So I'm making sure that I have successions of that. So every couple weeks I'll transplant like a third of a bed with fennel or something like that. And then same with like, all these like other niche things that you're not going to sell too much of at the market because not everyone likes fennel or whatever it is, and you're not going to want it in your CSA. You just want to make sure that you do have enough every single week for the wholesale.
Okay. So you're dedicating sort of multiple beds to those wholesale crops and then planting them in succession.
Totally.
With the plan that you're going to be harvesting on them over like weeks, months?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And like, you have to like really plan this out too, because you're seeding in your greenhouse, you have to let those seedlings germinate and everything, and then you have to make sure that you know that like in a couple weeks or a month or whatever you can transplant that, and that'll be ready like a week or a couple weeks after the previous planting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair. When you're thinking about what you're going to grow in your upcoming season, how are you staying on top of and factoring in some food trends?
Yeah, so for me personally, I go out to eat a lot, and I follow a lot of like restaurants and stuff on Instagram and social media, and I find that super, super helpful. This is also just something that like I really love going out to eat. I really love food. I love restaurants. So for me, it's very fun to keep up with these trends, and I know that like kale was like super popular last year or whatever, a couple of years ago, and like next year it might not be. So like keeping on top of like what could be the next thing is like really cool.
Do you find that it's a little bit of guessing and sort of
100%.
luck?
Yeah, totally. My co-farmer and I were talking about this yesterday, how like 5 years ago they would sell like a mass amount of kale, and now you have to beg people to buy your kale. And next year it could be like zucchinis, like the next big thing. You just have no idea.
Yeah, that's fair. It's hard when your time for planning is so far in advance of when the actual purchasing is going to happen. A lot can change. Yeah. So what excites you about growing for wholesale?
I love that I can go out to a restaurant and I can see that it's like my food that's on the menu. Same with like people who sell to like grocery stores. I'm sure that's like extremely exciting, going and seeing like your stuff on the shelf on display and people grabbing it. And otherwise, it's like really cool way to bring more people into your business, because the people that are going out to eat might not be the people that are in your CSA or at your market stand every week and stuff like that. So I really like the way that it brings people in.
Expands the reach of what you're doing.
Exactly, yeah.
Cool.
Totally.
And then my last question is, what tips would you share with other producers who are looking to increase their success in wholesale?
Kind of like what we were talking about previously with learning how to like properly store your stuff and process your stuff. I think that's really, really huge to start, because if a chef reaches out to you and you give them a product and it's not up to snuff, like you're not going to get more clients off of that. So like really dialing in like your processing from the get is like gonna really, really like do really good things for you, and like knowing how to store things, knowing how to package things. And then just reaching out to chefs or food hubs or whatever, like I don't know, like growing things that other people aren't growing, stuff like that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
We've got a few questions that you might want to ask yourself if you're just getting started with crop planning for wholesale. The first question we have is, how much growing area do you have access to?
The second is, what is the actual cost of producing your product, including all inputs and labor?
You might want to also think about, what are you skilled at growing?
And are you able to put season extension into place for tender or long season crops?
Do you harvest by hand or by machine?
Do you prefer to focus on aesthetics, specialty varieties handled with great care, or efficiency, highly productive crops harvested quickly in bulk?
Do you have enough support on your farm to handle large orders?
Do you have the time and infrastructure to coordinate many smaller orders or fewer larger orders?
And does your farm infrastructure support the type of products you're thinking about growing? Well, thank you so much for coming to talk about this.
Yeah.
This has been really, really helpful.
Sweet, my pleasure. I enjoyed it.
Awesome. We'd like to take a moment to thank the organizations and individuals who have helped us to make this project happen. First, I'd like to thank Food and Beverage Manitoba for providing generous support to this video project and the larger wholesale readiness project that it's part of. I'd also like to thank the province of Manitoba for their funding and support. We want to thank the Lord Roberts Community Centre for sharing this space with us to film in. And we want to thank the food hubs, suppliers, and customers who have shared their knowledge and experience with us, helping us to evolve and grow throughout this project.